over again, I could rely on them, and my screen over there and this one here. So what are autoimmune diseases? It's that'd be good, Jetty. It's when the immune system attacks a component of our own body. That is, there's an error in the immune system's normal recognition of self, which is amazing that it nearly always gets it right. And then you get antibodies that latch onto some of your body's own molecular structures. And this sets off a whole cascade of inflammation and destruction. And this sort of immune system attack, it can be localized, like it might attack a particular cell type, like the beta cells, and then you have type 1 diabetes because they make insulin, or the thyroid cells. Although sometimes it might tend to attack joints like rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis. Other times the protein that you target, part of yourself, might be something that's all over your body, as in Wegener's and lupus, where you can get kidney disease and lung disease and joint problems, a whole host of problems across the body. So really it's a very diverse set of diseases, and I guess theoretically our own immune system could target just about any protein, any structure in our body. And this is interesting because just recently there's a publication about autoimmune diseases showing the more common ones, and some of these I've listed are the thyroid autoimmune diseases, both
Is there a slide before that?
I missed a slide, didn't I? No. So we're looking at thyroid autoimmune diseases, both underactive and overactive, depending on what type it is, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, spondylitic arthritis with the spine, type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, lupus, Sjogren's. Celiac's a sort of autoimmune disease as well, and some of the inflammatory bowel diseases are really autoimmune diseases. So there's an awful lot of them. If you're here and you go, where's my Wegener's? Actually, that's been renamed because he was a Nazi sympathizer. Where's my granulomatosis with polyangiitis listed? And it's like, and I've got one of those patients and she's doing really well on whole foods plant-based, but it's rare. So if your condition is not listed, a lot of the lifestyle principles sort of apply generally across most of the autoimmune diseases. So I hope this will still be useful. So this week's news, in my medical newspaper, a large UK database study of 22 million people found that over the last 19 years, autoimmune diseases increased by 22%, particularly celiac, Sjogren's and Graves' disease. Still getting myself orientated here. So this is interesting because there's some epidemiology sort of change with time, because we already know that autoimmune diseases are more common in developed countries. And this includes type 1 diabetes. It includes rheumatoid arthritis. You go back decades and decades, you wouldn't find much rheumatoid in Central Africa or rural Asia. Inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, that's one that's been increasing. As countries westernise, that increases rapidly, and now we have countries in the world, developing countries, where suddenly they're having to learn how to treat these diseases that they saw very little of in the past. So what causes all these autoimmune diseases? I don't claim to have all the answers here. Genes are our predisposition. Like, a quarter of us have the celiac gene, but like only 1 in 100 of us have it. But the epidemiology of where it happens and the change in incidence with time suggests that it's more that the environmental factors are more important. Like, I don't think humans evolved to have, 1 in 10 or more of us with dud thyroids. That just doesn't make sense. There's something out there, whether it's a food component or the flame retardants have been implicated. There's often something out there. And then there's a cause can be molecular mimicry, and that's where you have some food or part of a bacteria or virus, and when the body makes an antibody to it, it's almost the same shape as something in your own body. So for example, there's a protein in milk that has this long amino acid sequence that's identical to part of those beta cells that make insulin. So, dairy is just one of the sort of triggers for type 1 diabetes. And then you can have oxidative damage, where some of your own molecules, proteins sort of get oxidized and damaged, or something hooks onto them, new 5GCs in meat and dairy, but not in humans. And if that sort of becomes incorporated into our body, the immune system can go, hang on, I think that's foreign. So all these factors can trigger it. And dysregulation of the gut immune system is a big factor. And for anyone who thinks we just want a strong immune system, any of you who've had a severe, rheumatoid or some autoimmune disease will be thinking, I didn't want my immune system to be strong. I want it to be well regulated. I want it to fight the bugs and things well, but then I want it to stay calm and not go overboard. And the gut, what goes on in the gut and the microbiome plays a major role. And we'll come to that. Medical treatments, well, we try and reduce the inflammatory reaction. We might give anti-inflammatory tablets for a period of time. We might give low-dose, cortisone, prednisolone tablets. Or we'll try and suppress the immune system with drugs. And that can be something general like methotrexate or high-dose cortisone, or a lot of these very specific drugs now, the MABs, or, for example, adalimumab and all these other unpronounceable MABs that are drugs that just target one little part of the immune system. What could possibly go wrong? And I'm not anti these drugs, but I've had a couple of patients who've ended up in pneumonia when they're on the drugs. One of them was actually quite cross because she thought the specialist was giving her a new drug that wasn't an immune suppressant. So she was a bit cross when it led to pneumonia. But the other thing is, if someone has an autoimmune disease, we want to replace the function of the damaged cells, like insulin. And sometimes there's single dietary components that we need to eliminate. You've got celiac, you're going to have to avoid gluten. You've got Crohn's disease or hidradenitis suppurativa, again, unpronounceable, mysterious disease. You want to avoid yeast with those ones. So you do not want to undertreat your autoimmune disease. This is something I see in clinical practice time and time again. People go, oh, no, I don't want to do the drugs, I want to do it all naturally. And I support lifestyle medicine and doing it naturally, trying to treat the cause. But the pharmaceutical treatment and the medical treatment, they're not mutually exclusive. They can be used together. And sometimes when you take drugs, it can sort of arrest highly destructive process. Like if your fingers start to go like that, you want to suppress all that inflammation and immune reaction, or it will end up destroying the joints. Or if you've got lupus, you don't want to, you want to dampen it down with drugs so it doesn't destroy your kidneys. Or in Wegener's, you don't want to destroy the lungs. My patient with renamed granulomatous GPA, my patient with GPA, she was wrapped this week because she had a CT of the lungs and it showed that over the last couple of years there's been no progression in the lung damage from her disease. And all she's on is a tiny bit of prednisolone, so she's very happy with that. So when if you've lost a tissue that makes hormones, you want to replace them. I mean, really, it's a no-brainer. Insulin, if you don't make insulin, you'll die if you don't have insulin. If your adrenals don't work, uncommon but not super rare disease, then you'll end up passing out from low blood pressure if you don't replace it. Thyroid hormone, Yeah, you don't want it to be overactive from your autoimmune, or you'll get things like osteoporosis quite rapidly. And you don't want to go around for years with a very underactive thyroid without taking thyroid hormone, because you'll end up with high cholesterol and fluid accumulation and weight gain, all of which will damage your general health. So that's my plug for the medical side. Autoimmune diseases also travel together. Like if you have one, you're more likely to get another. Again, these are stats from the UK. If you get type 1 diabetes in childhood, look at those numbers. You're 10 times as likely to get thyroid, 28 times as likely to get celiac, 26 times as likely to get Addison's, that's the adrenals. And this is, I think this is more likely to be environmental. We haven't identified a gene or set of genes that universally makes you get autoimmune diseases. Some of you may have heard of someone called Cyrus Kambata from Mastering Diabetes Organisation. When he went to hospital in his 20s with type 1 diabetes, he also had hypothyroidism and an autoimmune disease that attacks hair follicles. So he has no hair, needs to take insulin and needs to take thyroid hormone, and promotes whole foods plant-based nutrition because he does really well at that, as most people do even when they have type 1 diabetes. Nutrition and lifestyle, with all this increase of not only the risk of getting an autoimmune disease but the risk of getting multiples, we think that nutrition and lifestyle may reduce this risk in the long term. And this is where the sort of lifestyle medicine concept comes in. Lifestyle medicine is using evidence-based, health behaviour changes to prevent disease, make you healthy, prevent disease and treat disease, and sometimes even reverse and stop disease. And these domains, as they call it, nutrition, stress management and mental wellness, physical activity, social connectedness, sleep, and avoiding risky substance use. I think that of all these domains of lifestyle medicine, nutrition is the keystone. If you get the nutrition right, some of the others tend to fall in place. But if you truly want to be healthy and treat conditions, you can't totally neglect any of these. So the general principles of using food and lifestyle as medicine is, as much as possible, to treat the cause, not just the measurements. Because when we have the food that we use has countless phytonutrients, plant substances that work on multiple systems in the body, which gives it a lot of power, even comparable to some of the pharmaceuticals, which usually just work on one little thing. And when we use lifestyle, when we use food as medicine, we tend to get this wide effect where what we use to treat your condition won't give you something else, but will actually protect your health in general. We tend to prescribe things more holistically. I'm more likely to prescribe the pattern of food and things than to sort of take things off a spice rack and say, take a bit of this or take one of these. The personalisation issue, yeah, that's important, but it is a bit overstated. And then as patients improve, we deprescribe or decrease their medicine when they start to get better. So for example, the lady with GPA, her cortisone sort of dose is gradually whittling away as she gets better. We didn't start off and say, look, just stop all your medicines to start with, because she probably would have had a big flare-up. So as a general rule, pharmaceuticals tend to inhibit normal physiological processes, whereas plant-based nutrition and lifestyle work by enhancing normal processes, as a generalisation. So is there any evidence out there? Yeah, there is some evidence out there coming from observational studies, from case studies, from clinical experience, and some randomised controlled trials. It'd be nice to have more randomised controlled trials. medicine regards these as the gold standard, but for a lot of things we don't. We don't even have a randomised controlled trial to show that, not smoking will stop your lung cancer, or stopping whacking your head will stop you from getting dementia. So sometimes we just have to go on these other sources of information. PCRM did a rheumatoid arthritis study, and they got people to go on a low-fat vegan diet, and the other group not to. And they measured a significant reduction in joint pain and inflammation. More recently, there was a large Dutch study, which again used a whole food plant-based diet, but used more lifestyle intervention. They were looking to get big effects, so they thought, we'll have an exercise program, we'll have some stress management. Again, that was a fairly recent study, and they got some excellent results. They actually, objectively, without the researcher knowing who's in what group, they measured the inflammation of joints and found that their intervention had a substantial effect. And then multiple sclerosis, the data for that goes back decades and decades with a physician called Roy Swank, who had a very low saturated fat diet that he gave his patients with MS. And some of them he followed for, about 30 years and got very good results using that. And there's some observational data on MS. Some of these diseases, the specialists will say, there's no evidence for that. And you go Google Scholar or something like that and start doing searches for medical research, and you go, up come all these articles. In the case of MS, those who eat more animal products, saturated fat, get more MS. Even those people with MS, if they eat more plant protein, if they eat more other plant-based nutrients, they actually get less progression of their MS. So we have got data out there. And my own clinical experience is with people doing patients, including that one with GPA. Recently I've seen someone who for a couple of years has been treating her underactive thyroid autoimmune disease with a predominantly raw plant-based diet. And she gave me permission this week to talk about her data. We've been measuring the antibody levels, the autoimmune antibody levels for a couple of years. They're trending downwards. We've been measuring her thyroid function, which was, a bit under-functioning. It's now in the normal range. At our live-in immersion events, we have people living in for the week. It's a blue zone, unless they smuggle food in or something and get past our sniffer dogs. No, we're not, people can do whatever they want. We don't have sniffer dogs at our live-in events. But we feed them, 3 times a day plus snacks, and we feed them the food as good as we can do. And we see some great results, particularly with pain and arthritis. I remember one lady with rheumatoid arthritis, she's writing something down on the last lunch before she goes home and goes, that thumb's not really hurting today. We see so many people with their osteoarthritis joints that the inflammation and the pain in particular settles before the end of 1 week. So for nutrition for autoimmune diseases, first up, we want to put out the fire, reduce the inflammation. So we want a highly anti-inflammatory diet. And then we also want to restore the health of the gut and the microbiome. At the same time, we don't want to damage their health. We want to enhance their health and vitality in general. Sorry to all the low carbers in the industry and everything, but a whole food plant-based diet best meets these criteria of creating a low inflammation and getting a healthy gut microbiome. But note that other lifestyle domains are really important. Stress management, sleep, exercise. So I've mentioned a whole foods plant-based diet. What is that? Well, it's a diet that's based on whole grains, legumes, vegetables and fruits, minimal food processing, vegetable oils left out, as is sugar, and animal products are left out. And it might sound radical, but when you think of it, it's like, it's not really more controversial to recommend more whole grains, legumes, fruits and vegetables, unless you're selling lectin supplements or something bizarre. And it's not controversial to recommend less processed food. And it is well established that diets high in animal products are associated with chronic disease. So, inflammation. Inflammation is really important. You know, our bodies need inflammation when it's needed, where it's needed, for a short period of time. Too much inflammation is really bad. Like this was one of the things that kills people with COVID. There's not so much the virus eating them up, but their own immune reaction, just having this wild so-called cytokine storm which fills their lungs up with fluid. Chronic inflammation. Inflammation just rumbles on and on and on. That's a factor in so many different diseases, heart disease included, certainly autoimmune diseases. There are many phytonutrients. Can I have a slide on them, Jenny? You know, they're all those essential nutrients that we need. You know, if you don't have vitamin B12 or thiamine, you know, you'll die eventually. But there are all these other things in plants, like dietary fibre being a classic, antioxidants, that are sort of really important for health, really essential for good health, but they're not essential nutrients as such. There are thousands, there's perhaps 100,000 of them. And some of these plant phytonutrients actually regulate inflammation, even at the cellular level, like down-regulating this unpronounceable sort of master switch of inflammation in each cell, inhibiting tumour necrosis factor, an inflammatory factor the body makes. That it was through the study of herbs and foods that they actually developed drugs to do this. There are very few anti-inflammatory components in animal products and processed food. Inflammatory foods, nice pictures that you put in there this morning, Jenny. Things in food that really, you know, are inflammatory and for the body and cause reaction is endotoxins, the sort of dead bits of bacteria on meat, saturated fats, mainly from animal sources, but also from plant sources, arachidonic acids, your long-chain omega-6, think eggs, think chicken in particular, and many others. And then even if you just brown a piece of meat or chicken and fish, you're creating all these heterocyclic amines and polyaromatic hydrocarbons, these sort of inflammatory carcinogens. And then when it's not just in the meat. I mean, meat is quite high in AGEs, which sort of promote inflammation and aging, but you generate some of these aging, inflammatory, damaging substances when you fry food.
Sorry, can you just, what about fish? Could you?
I skipped fish, didn't I? Yeah, that's the sun. Just when we don't need the sunshine, it comes out. Look, when you compare fish to chicken and to beef and things, like it's a winner. Compare it to plants, and it doesn't look quite so good. You know, even that salmon has some omega-3s, but it's also got quite a lot of saturated fat. It's also got quite a lot of, you know, arachidonic acid, which is inflammatory. So, you know, the whole package is not that great. And, you know, while omega-3s, you know, long-chain omega-3s have some anti-inflammatory effect, it's, I would say, not enough to offset all of the other things in fish. And of course, people talk about, you know, processed and ultra-processed food and things. Yeah, all these foods, you know, they're usually packed with all sorts of stuff. It's usually a sugar, fat, salt sort of mix, and that's inflammatory of itself. But more so, it totally lacks these protective phytonutrients, the antioxidants and the anti-inflammatories. Obesity itself is inflammatory. Don't blame me for this. There's no shame in this, but you know, it's sort of for some strange quirk of nature, when a human being puts a lot of fat on, that fat actually releases inflammatory mediators back into the body and causes, you know, low-grade inflammation across the body. We hope that if you get the diet right, that the excess body fat will just be one of the things that happens, that it will go down. Dental disease. Yeah, I want to have good teeth because that periodontal disease, it's associated with many inflammatory conditions.
Sorry, just one other thing on that. The heme iron, I'd like you to talk about that.
Yeah, that heme iron in red meat, there's some in chicken and fish too. Heme iron is a form of iron bound to this heme molecule. It's really well absorbed. In fact, your body will absorb it even if you've already got too much iron. So that's why people go, yeah, eat that red meat. The iron is so well absorbed. But heme iron also sort of is an pro-oxidant rather than antioxidant. It sort of causes oxidation and damage to tissues, like the pancreas, the insulin-producing cells, for example. And it's also associated with heart disease, probably through its inflammatory effect. So, it's a well-absorbed source of iron, but given the negative side of it, I wouldn't be recommending that someone eats red meat for their iron. Any more than I'd recommend that they go and drink from the Yarra for their water down near where I live in Richmond. So some of those anti-inflammatory foods, the foods that will help to neutralise oxidation and down-regulate inflammation. Well, you could use foods, the sort of pharmaceutical approach might be going, I'll have my turmeric each day and I'll sprinkle black pepper to make it more active. Actually, watch out for turmeric. There have been some cases in the US where people have taken very large amounts of turmeric and it's caused liver problems. Really, I think the hint there with all those spices is if you're using them within the sort of normal amounts that people might traditionally use in foods, there should be no problems. Yes, they are anti-inflammatory, and it may help, but we'd rather see you have your turmeric in your delicious evening vegetable bean curry than have it as a supplement. We tend to take the whole foods approach to reducing inflammation. To incorporate things like berries into my morning porridge. Leafy green vegetables are a real winner for dampening down inflammation. Grains too. Who would know that whole grains actually have polyphenols, antioxidants in them? But beyond that, things like whole grains and legumes that are traditionally thought of as, sort of filler foods, and they haven't got a lot of all those coloured things in them. They feed the microbiome, which in itself can reduce inflammation. So a disease-fighting diet is as much about what you do eat as what you eliminate. Hold the salt, the sodium. We did an FAQ on sodium, I think a couple of years ago. And the more we read about all these things that excess salt can do, the worse the story got. And so people say to me, look, can I can eat salt because I don't have blood pressure. And it's like, if you don't have high blood pressure and you definitely have no artery disease, which most of us have, and you don't get bloating, you don't get premenstrual fluid retention, and you don't have painful joints, then maybe you could eat a bit more sodium. That's not many of us, really. So there's data from studies of cells, from studies of unfortunate rodents, mice, and some human data that suggests that salt has quite a pro-inflammatory effect on autoimmune disease, and the increased intakes associated with worsening of a number of autoimmune diseases. And they found that salt, excess of salt, because it's essential that there's some in our food, which occurs naturally, excess of salt activates some of the immune cells that then go to the joints and do the inflammatory reaction. We need more clinical studies to look into this, but we know that a low sodium diet has general benefits across artery health, gut health, etc. So it's not a radical recommendation. Of course, the dietary salt also includes all the fancy salts and soy sauce and miso. Even common foods like bread are actually quite high in salt. So beware of recipes that have no added salt, but have teaspoons and tablespoons of miso and soy and things like that. I would say if you're really trying to strictly lower sodium, perhaps you could aim to keep your sodium intake below 1,200 milligrams per day. The national recommendation is below 2,000. Used to be below 1500, but they thought it was too hard. So prevention and treatment of autoimmune disease begins in the gut. And this, my daughter's a bit of an artist and illustrator.
Line up with this kind of
Line up here. I'll be out of the sun.
I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah, that's good. That's good. Why is the sun here when we don't need it? Yeah, so anyway, I'm not an illustrator, and I'm sure some form of chat GPT will be able to help me in the future.